Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to call the meeting to order. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julian Morse. I'm the MLA for Frame Lake, chair of this committee. Today's meeting is public and being live streamed on the Assembly's social media channels. I did just want to note a special note for today that we are expecting potentially a power outage during this briefing, in which case I think the plan is to continue with the briefing, and we're going to post the ultimate briefing online because we're going to be able to continue with the recording through our generator, but won't be able to broadcast live. So that's I think how we're going to handle it. But we're really hoping that we can get through the presentation prior to any outages happening. So fingers crossed. So I will now ask members to introduce themselves, starting with members in the room. Ms. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Kate Reid. I am the MLA for Great Slave.
Okay, and we have at least one member online. Mr. Hawkins, you want to start?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's Robert Hawkins here, MLA for Yellowknife Center, and I should at this moment pass on the regrets of Mr. Richard Jericon. He's a member of the committee. He is at a funeral and a community, I'll call it a gathering of sorts, obviously funeral, and he again expresses his regrets for not being here, but I'm here, and along with our millions of subscribers on the Legislative Assembly social media. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So today we are pleased to be joined by Elizabeth King and Ben Singer, who are directors at Procurement and Shared Services in the Department of Finance, to brief us on the development of a GNWT Indigenous Procurement Policy. So thanks so much for joining us today. I understand you have a presentation, and I'll turn it over to you, and we'll go to questions after the presentation.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. Are they working? Okay. Great, thank you. So, thank you for having us here today. The purpose of the presentation is, I'll just give a quick overview, is why the GNWT is developing an Indigenous procurement policy, key elements under consideration, some approaches to increase participation of Indigenous businesses in GNWT procurement, and engagement to date and next steps. So the big kind of goal today is to hear your perspectives on what you think the policy should include, how it should shape. There's a lot of opportunity to influence and shape what this will look like, so I'm very eager to hear what your thoughts are today. So the big question is, why have an Indigenous procurement policy? So at a high level, it's to enhance opportunities for Indigenous businesses to participate in GNWT procurement opportunities. So this was one of the recommendations that came out of the procurement review in 2021, that one of the recommendations was to have an Indigenous procurement policy, but it wasn't defined further than that to say, which businesses should that be targeting specifically, the definition, or, any of the approaches. It was just that the GNWT should work on one. It would be a policy to specifically support Indigenous businesses. Also in line with the business incentive policy would be to keep government spend and contracts in the NWT. It would be a step towards supporting economic reconciliation, and it would be a way of give us an opportunity to report on contracts issued to NWT Indigenous businesses. Without a definition of an NWT Indigenous business right now, we actually can't do any reporting on the contracts issued to those businesses, so that's a gap that we'd like to close. So there's two key pieces of the policy. The first is to define an NWT Indigenous business. who that is. And the second is to identify some potential approaches to support these businesses in G&WT procurement opportunities. Throughout everything, transparency is a big priority that we're mindful to maintain. Okay, so getting into it, the proposed definition, and like I mentioned, this is a work in progress, so I'm interested to hear your feedback on this, but the proposed definition of an NWT Indigenous business would be a business registered under the Business Incentive Policy in which Indigenous peoples who are recognized members and descendant of a First Nations, Métis, or Inuit people Indigenous to the present boundaries of the NWT have majority, which is more than 50% of realized economic and monetary benefits, and majority, more than 50% in management control of the business. So the reason that part is highlighted in blue is there's already been quite a bit of feedback that that definition should be broadened to be Indigenous peoples of Canada, defined by Section 35 of the Constitution Act, but that are still resident in the NWT. So, if you were Cree from Manitoba, but you live in the NWT, you have a business here, then you would qualify, whereas the part that's highlighted in blue, you wouldn't qualify. So no decision's been made on this yet. There's been different, perspectives shared on it, so interested to hear your thoughts or what you might be hearing from your constituents on that definition. What's notably not included in this definition is percentage of employees that would form part of a business. Through some discussions, it's been kind of noted that would be a limiting factor for business growth if they couldn't find enough Indigenous employees, that they wouldn't be qualified as Indigenous business. So that's one of the things that we've chosen to not include for now. There have been different perspectives on that as well, though. And a key piece of it is having that majority of realized economic and monetary benefits going to Indigenous people. A lot of the feedback to date's been that's an important piece to make sure that benefits actually go to Indigenous people, and you get away from, some shell companies or different things where the benefits not actually, staying in the north and going to Indigenous people. So some approaches were developed for further consideration, and the final policy might actually include multiple approaches to, that might work better for different businesses of different sizes or in different scopes. With these, it would be separate from existing land claim obligations, so that would be separate. And the idea overall is to balance fair and competitive procurement process while still providing meaningful opportunities for Indigenous businesses, trying to find a balance there. So the first potential approach would be for sort of those lower value contracts under $25,000. The approach here would be very in line with the current business incentive policy, but it would be amending that. So there's an order of priority. So for contracts under $25,000, right now the order of priority would say to go to the local BIP registered business. One of the options is that we would amend that and say go to the local NWT Indigenous registered business first, and then the local non-Indigenous business, and then so forth. Within this, you would still need to provide, some guidance to say that the pricing needs to be within a certain amount. So it would be a preference, but not like a firm line. So some guidance around that would be helpful. And an example of this would be if you had a contract, or you went to purchase a boat engine. If you had two quotes from two businesses in a community, they both came in at the same amount, one from an Indigenous business and one from not, they're both BIP registered, then you would be awarding to that NWT Indigenous registered business. The second approach would be for bid adjustments. So similar to the business incentive policy, there's bid adjustments in that policy. The second approach would be to have an additional bid adjustment, potentially for 5% for NWT Indigenous businesses. So in the business incentive policy, you would have 15% for northern NWT content, another 5% for local content, and then an NWT Indigenous business could have potentially another 5% of a bid adjustment. It would apply for subcontracting to the businesses. The difference, a bit of a difference with the business incentive policy is that we wouldn't go to the employee level, so it would be a benefit to the business, like any work subcontracted to the business. It wouldn't go to, looking at the percentage of employees in that business. It would just be like the percent subcontracted to the business. And then likewise for any, any joint ventures, it'd be an amount, you could still have Indigenous business content for the amount that's being done by the NWT, Indigenous Registered Business. Okay, so our third approach is not related to the business incentive policy, and where we were trying to get a bit more creative to like really create opportunities. So the idea here was to find opportunities on projects, either big or small, for NWT Indigenous businesses to participate without having to bid on the entire scope. So it would be to work with businesses, understand what their interest and capacity is to participate on the project. And then you could potentially set this as a work package, have it, separated within the RFP. That would then go out for public competition. It would be awarded to a main contractor, and then you sort of connect the NWT Indigenous Registered Business and the main contractor and have them form a subcontracting relationship. A lot of concerns raised on this one is that businesses, they want to be able to choose their own subcontractors if they're going to then be held accountable for the work and the schedule and delivery of that. So I think it won't work as we had initially thought. However, through discussions, there's been a lot of really good, suggestions that have come up in this area to try and create more opportunities. Like, a bid adjustment is a good thing. Changing the order of priority, like those things will make a difference, but really creating opportunities, we're looking for more kind of areas to do that. Okay, so some key dates. So after the procurement review in 2021, engagement began with the Modern Treaty and Self-Government Partners in the North, and then to the Northwest Territories Council of Leaders to discuss what an Indigenous procurement policy could look like. There were, a lot of meetings at the time, lots of good discussions, but there wasn't really an alignment or an agreement on there wasn't a consensus on the definition or what the right approaches would be that would work. So more recently, engagement restarted in January with Indigenous governments and Indigenous organizations, and that's ongoing throughout this policy development, trying to reach out and really get as much of the feedback from them as we possibly can to inform what this will look like. In April and May, right now, we're in public engagement to hear from businesses in the NWT. At the end of the day, this policy is really to support businesses in the Indigenous businesses in the NWT, and there will be an impact on all businesses in the NWT when you implement some of these things, if that's what ends up happening. So trying to hear as much from businesses in the North as we can, meeting with you guys here. And then after this, there will be a What We Heard report that'll be created and shared publicly. Then the real, big work will happen to develop the policy based on all of the feedback shared. We'll share more updates and reach out to the council leaders again, and then consultation, returning to standing committee and all that. The goal is to have a final policy by the end of 2025. That is a very efficient timeline, but I think it still looks achievable, and I think we can do something that will make sense. So that's the end of what we had for slides, and interested in your thoughts and what you're hearing about this, what you would like to see be part of the policy.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the presentation. I have Ms. Reed for questions first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I'm going to ask a really basic question. I have always found procurement a little bit mystifying, so bear with me, please. Can you explain the concept of bid adjustments, please? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Who wants to take this one? Elizabeth?
Yeah.
Ms. King?
Ben, jump in if I miss this. So it's a great question because we talk about it a lot, but I don't think people, can picture it. So it's if you had say a tender and you had a bid come in at, $100,000 and then another bid came in, from say, what we have right now under the business incentive policy, bid for $100,000. If it's a local business or an NWT business, you would reduce that by 15%. So then when you're evaluating it, it would be evaluated actually as if the bid came in at $85,000. And then another 5% for local if it was, a Fort Smith-based business and the tender was there. So you're evaluating it as if it was an $80,000 bid compared to some of the other ones, whether they qualify or not.
Okay, thanks. Second question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that. I didn't want to make any assumptions, but we just jumped right into it, and because I have not been involved in procurement policy review before this, I just wanted to ensure I was on the right page. I think I am. That's great. Thank you for that confirmation. So my next question is covering your concept around that you spoke about on the proposed definition around who is considered an NWT Indigenous business. So my question to you as that is laid out here, the Indigenous peoples who are recognized members and descendant of First Nation, Métis, or Inuit people Indigenous to the present boundaries of the NWT. How do we define what is within the present boundaries of the NWT? Do we consider transboundary First Nations in that definition? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thanks. Ms. King, you want to take that one on?
Good question. The idea was we would probably follow something similar to what student financial assistance does, where they have it laid out. They have a verification process. So if that's the approach, it would be pretty aligned with an existing process that's in place.
Thank you. I have Mr. Hawkins next for round one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually don't have questions for the staff. I appreciate the work that they've done, so I want to emphasize that. My questions I prefer unanswered because I think they're political questions. And as committee will know, without me going on at length, I absolutely object to these briefings without the minister because ultimately all questions rise to political in some form or fashion so in other words, my questions, which again, I want to stress, are focused not at the staff. And again, I can't stress enough, I do appreciate the work that they're doing here. This is not a reflection of that. This is a principle I have, and I wish to stand by. But my concerns around targets as to why are they set there and how are they set there and what are trying to be achieved specifically. So in other words, I understand we want more Indigenous procurement opportunities. That's a political decision, which means we should have politicians talking about this. Furthermore, more of a technical question, unfortunately, but I'm not interested in the answer yet, which is how do we measure it? How do we know if we're achieving what we're achieving? That is down the road, but because they're set based on those fundamental targets. So I thank the staff for their initiative work. I look forward to the what we heard report that they'll do. I look forward to the final proposal that members will be educated on. And I would also emphasize that I think we have fantastic staff at the Assembly, and they would have done a bang-up job on the presentation here today. So I often think it's a sad use or time dragging you folks in here what our staff could have ran through in the same amount of time. But I do thank you for your expertise, and I know we're a better government for them, and I do appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay. I won't make you try to respond to that because the members asked you not to. So I have a few questions for round one. The first one is just about subcontracting. So you made a note about how Indigenous businesses being subcontracted within a larger contract could help that larger contract kind of meet the requirements for an Indigenous business. But I was wondering if we have any thoughts or have considered the phenomenon of that going the other way. So an Indigenous business bids on a kind of a larger project and then subcontracts to non-Indigenous businesses. I mean, how does that kind of, I suppose, like kind of a bypassing of the policy, so to speak. Have we contemplated that phenomenon, or are we concerned about that, or considering it? Thanks.
So that's a really good point. So what I think where the subcontracting comes into play, I mean, it could happen on ideally, businesses would be able to, like NWT Indigenous businesses would be able to compete on GNWT contracting opportunities. Often what some of the criticism is that the size of the scopes are too big, that they're not able to bid on the entire scope. They're just not of that size. They're not able to get the bonding for it. There's barriers in place because they're just not at that size yet, but they still want to be able to do that scope. Or maybe they're, an earthworks company, so they can't do they don't have the technical capabilities of doing the whole scope, but they want to do the part of it that's aligned with their business. So that's where the subcontracting opportunities come into play. So it might not work the other way where, if it's a smaller business trying to take on the whole scope and then subcontract, there's a lot of risk in being that main contractor as well, of needing to have that oversight and the experience. Ideally, if an NWT Indigenous business is able to bid on that whole scope, great. That would be really great to see. It's for where they're not able to do that, then to find more opportunities within maybe some of the projects and to sort of make it a bit more fit and aligned with the business size that they have.
Thanks. I'm not entirely sure that answer addressed my question of whether it would be considered, like, if we've considered the phenomenon of the subcontracting issue, though. Like, let's say an Indigenous business wins a contract over, say, another local business that doesn't qualify, and then subcontracts that work. Would that be considered a bypassing of the policy in some way? Say it's subcontracted to a southern company, or it's subcontracted to, a company that doesn't even work in the north. It's just a problem that has been raised with me as a potential issue to look at. And I'm just curious if we've contemplated that, or if we're not going to be in the business of sort of determining what they can do once they've won a contract. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I was on a different tangent. So yeah, that is kind of a known issue where a company will submit and they say that they will do that work, and then it ends up gets subcontracted out to another company that they didn't put in their bid. So when you submit proposal on RFP or a tender or whatnot, when you're submitting a bid, you're saying, this is how, I'm going to do this work, me, the company. That's the company that we're hiring to do the work. You cannot just then subcontract the whole work out to somebody else. We have heard some concerns about that happening. And, if there is going to be a change, then you need to notify, the GNWT and say that you're going to change and perform the scope in a way that was not communicated initially. It's a contract. You've made an agreement, a proposal to do something. But yeah, there is, I think it's just that transparency and making sure that happens. But it's a contractual agreement that you're saying you're going to do something in a certain way. Similar to, if you say you're going to use NWT through the business incentive policy, if you're going to use NWT subcontractors and you get a bid adjustment for subcontracting in the north, and then you change that, then there's a big push for having penalties for not doing what you've committed to do in that proposal. So the Procurement Shared Services Group has come up with a vendor performance management policy to address those type of things, and so we're mindful of that situation.
Okay, thank you for that. That counts as 2 questions from me. I'll go to round 2 if we have any members with further questions. Looking at you, Ms. Reed. Not this time. Okay, do we have any further questions online? I'm going to guess no, but not seeing a hand up at this time. So I did have another one, and that was just, I think this is just an issue with procurement generally, with government contracts, but I am curious, with sort of further incentivizing northern work, there's a little bit of there's a, how do I put this? It can be a little bit of a double-edged sword for the government in the sense that ensuring that we are benefiting northern businesses as much as possible, with which politicians have a tendency to ask for and advocate for, it can also cause costs to drive up for the government. So can you discuss how with procurement we're looking at keeping costs manageable while also doing our best to incentivize not only Indigenous procurement, but just northern procurement generally? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, managing costs while still providing, so at a basic level, we need to crunch the numbers on this a bit more to, make the models that will, back up the position more. But it's the idea that if you spend money in the north, then it can circulate around in the community, in the economy, and there, jobs and all the extra beneficial things for that. There's, yeah, it's helpful to have that money circulating around the economy. It's a good point, like the balance between the value for money. And I think it's more that not just lowest cost, but that value for money perspective that I think we probably could do a better job at. It's come up quite a bit in the last few weeks of meetings. I expect to hear more of that. But yeah, I think we need to do a bit more of crunching the numbers to sort of demonstrate that. I don't know, Ben, do you have anything else you'd add around that piece?
No, I think at this time I would have to agree with my colleague. It's definitely something we've heard as well, but at this point, we do need to just review the numbers a bit more, look at the business incentive policy along with the Indigenous Procurement Policy, and just figure out what type of an impact that might have on the costs we're seeing up here. It is certainly something we're aware of, though, so we will continue to monitor that and possibly have a bit more information a little later in the IPP development process.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think it's something that everyone could agree. I mean, we want to be benefiting northern businesses as much as possible. And we also here at the same time, and I encountered this at the city, we were doing very similar things also, just that there's this kind of push and pull between keep taxes low, keep costs down, and also you need to be incentivizing all these local businesses. And of course, sometimes those businesses have a difficult time competing with southern ones in terms of costs. So there's a bit of a balance to be drawn, and just ensuring that we're not driving costs up more than we need to ensure that we are, have viable businesses running here in the north. I did want to turn to the definition. You touched on it a bit, and I think Ms. Reed started to ask about this also, but just noting that during development of the Indigenous employment policy, the government did end up changing the definition that they were originally going to, which was going to open things up to all Indigenous Canadians, and that caused a fair bit of controversy and caused, a shift to happen. I'm wondering if we've learned a lesson from that and are perhaps going to be looking at that with the same lens in terms of keeping things consistent, knowing that I would imagine a lot of the feedback you're going to be getting from the public is going to be raising similar concerns about, are we ensuring that local Indigenous businesses are being prioritized first and foremost over southern businesses that may or may not be Indigenous owned? Thanks.
Yeah, so one of the key pieces, even in the definition, is that, to be as, it's an NWT Indigenous business, not just an Indigenous business. So it'd be within, you'd first need to meet their criteria of being a business, like being registered through the business incentive policy, which means you're a northern business. And then as far as the definition of, which Indigenous people or where you might be from, that's very much still in the works. There's a lot of different opinions on what that should be. We haven't, engagement's still ongoing, still looking at we'll look at the survey results when they come in. I don't know what the answer will be to that. It might even, depending on the approaches, there might be some more flexibility in some things than others. Like with a bid adjustment, it might be tricky to, kind of try to tier that, because if you're only working with 5% bid adjustment to, tier it for different businesses based on your ancestry, that would be very challenging to do and pretty complicated. But if you're looking at providing targeted opportunities in certain regional areas and whatnot, there's probably more flexibility to have that a bit more focused. So it might be, without making it overly complicated, you could sort of customize things a little bit depending on which of the approaches, make it all the way through and whatnot. But yeah, one of the sort of main goals today is to also like to hear from what you guys think it should be, like, from the MLAs, like, what are you hearing from your constituents? Like, what are concerns that you have about the policy? So these questions are good, and if there's anything else that you think we should be mindful of or do a better job of explaining, a lot of the decisions haven't been made yet, so we can say, some of the thinking that's been gone on to date, but I don't know what the answers are yet because they haven't been created. So any other thoughts you have on what it should be, I'm happy to continue to hear that. And actually, I just will mention also, there's still a couple of public engagement meetings coming up. There's one online for anyone from anywhere who can attend that. Anyone can reach out to me individually if they'd like to discuss more. There's the online survey, and there will be a meeting in Yellowknife on May 29th. So yeah, I'm hoping to get a lot more feedback in that'll help kind of answer some of these questions.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, just to answer that question a bit, I mean, I would suggest, just myself, that you consider the feedback that was received on the Indigenous Employment Policy, and that to the greatest extent, it's good for the government to be consistent in how it applies policies. So to have sort of different definitions applying to a certain thing and then other definitions applying to another, and then even a third set of, it just starts to get very complex, confusing, and I think consistency is something that should be striven for. So, I mean, I would encourage you to look at what feedback was received on the Indigenous Employment Policy and consider whether it's possible to align things to the best extent possible, because that's engagement that was already done and received and responded to. So I would expect some of the feedback you're going to receive is quite similar, and I would just, we don't have all the members of SCOGO here today, but just to reflect on some of the things that we heard during the development of that policy. I think it was really strongly emphasized that the idea here and the reason people advocate for these kinds of policies is so that they can see opportunities going to their community members. It's not so much that they're concerned about whether or not a person from the South bidding on a contract, whether they're Indigenous or not. If you're a person running a business in the community, it's here nor there to you if you aren't able to get those opportunities. So I think that is generally the feedback that we got on the employment policy. So I think that's good information for you to use going forward. I wanted to dig in a little bit more to one of the questions, or the answer that you gave to the questions. You noted that there's been a big push for penalties related to people going outside the scope of an already agreed upon contract. It sounds like those penalties or those policies are either in place or they're being developed. Can you just help me better understand that a little bit?
I can trust that one.
Sure.
So we did implement the vendor performance management policy in October 2023. Following that, we implemented the vendor performance management guidelines, which provided a process to apply a payment adjustment for construction contracts valued $250,000 and over. So basically the way that works is when a project is completed, if the BIP numbers were not met, so if the BIP commitment, the contractor did not comply with the BIP commitment, then they would be subject to a payment adjustment at the end of the project. So it would be relative to the amount that they failed to comply with those commitments. But it is in place, and we've had that implemented since June 2024.
Thank you. Well, that covers the questions I have to begin with. I don't know, Ms. Reed, it doesn't look like you have any. Mr. Hawkins already indicated where he lies in terms of questions. And so I think that concludes the public briefing. I don't know if you have any closing comments or any further feedback you'd be looking for from committee that you're looking to solicit.
Well, thank you for the opportunity for coming in.
Okay. Thanks a lot. And yeah, I'm definitely curious to see what comes out of further public engagement, particularly engagement with the IGs. I mean, that was where the employment policy ended up getting changed when the minister started engaging with IGs directly. And so I would imagine that kind of feedback will help you guys in developing this policy and getting it to a place that everyone can agree on it, or at least agree to disagree. I'm not sure. But yeah, hard to get everybody on board with everything 100%, but we can try to get as many people as possible. So thanks very much. I think that concludes the public portion of the briefing for today. Yes, it has. So we'll just shut down the broadcast, and if members can stick around, we've got a few in-camera items to deal with as well. So thanks very much to finance staff for coming in today.